Well, thank you all very, very much. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm going to share some things that are important to me, and it's part of what I consider advanced mob programming or advanced software teaming. The ideas that we generated during the time we started doing what became known as mob programming, which we didn't invent the term, but included this thinking I'm going to share with you today. I had about a 10-year period sometime in like 1999, where I had been introduced at a company where they were having quite a bit of communication problems. I worked there for about 6 months, and we started investigating these communication problems. And as we went through that, we identified a couple that were really at the top of the list. And so that was the beginning of me gathering the information I'm going to share today. But I want to start with a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to show you, oops, I've got to figure out how to get to the right place. There we go. I'm going to show you a picture for 3 seconds. And then, what I want you to do is notice whatever you can notice in 3 seconds. And then also, how does it make you feel? What are the feelings you get from seeing this picture? So there's 1, 2, 3. That's it. So let's reflect on that. What did you notice and what did you feel? Somebody can shout out from the audience. It's a marketplace. It was nice. It was light. Colorful. What else? Umbrellas. Spices, perhaps. What is? Fruits. Flower market. Okay, now when I do this as a workshop and I share that, I revisit this later. I'm not sure we're going to have time to, but right now what I would normally do is have everybody with the few people around you have a discussion about what you noticed. So you'll see how this fits into what we do. I'm not going to probably come back and refer to it, but if I were to do it, describe, so maybe I should ask, how did it make you feel? What was the feeling you had? Well, warmth. What's that? Humid. What? Pleasant. Pleasure. So I took that picture myself at a very large market in India that there was many, many, many different areas where they were selling things. We just shared something. If I were to have described that in writing, it would have taken me hours to write down what I saw in that picture. And it would take you a long time, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, to read that. And I don't think you'd get the same experience. That's not really too critical to what we're doing, but it's a good place to start. So I always like to say this: I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to tell you whether or not you should do something. I'm just sharing some ideas, some things that are important to me, and I hope you'll find them useful or meaningful to you. I just ask that you keep an open mind, and I'm not here to really tell you any truths. I'm here to tell you some things I think about. I'm asking you to pay attention, and I want to talk a little bit about paying attention. So this is something I learned in the last 10 years. I've been reading research on this idea, but I'm up here talking, and you're hearing me say things. And over a little bit amount of time, you get interested in something. And when you get interested enough in that thing, and you start thinking about it, you can no longer listen to me. And then time goes by as you think through that thing. Maybe you wrote a note or two, and then you look up and go, oh, dang, Woody's still talking, you know? And so then you start listening again, and you hear what I'm saying, and then all of a sudden you're thinking again. It's hard to shut off that thinking. I'm not asking you to shut off that thinking. I'm just telling you something that I think might be a reality, that throughout our day, we hear a little bit, and then we internalize it, and we stop listening, and we can't pay attention for very long. We can only do this in very small bits. So this is sort of the beginning of this. So this is where I want to start. How well are we communicating? Essentially, we behave as if we've been understood when we're trying to communicate something. But worse, or we think we're understanding, but worse, when we're trying to communicate something, we have a problem in thinking that whatever we've said has been internalized by the other person. My father used to say this, or my mother would say, Woody, you only hear the things you want to hear. That was something I probably heard more frequently from my mother than my father. But because I'm not always hearing everything that's being said. So when something does catch my attention, I might hear it, but maybe not. We're going to explore that today. But I think maybe we're communicating when we think we're succeeding and we're actually failing. This is a place I kind of, that's what this talk is about. To be fair, it doesn't matter very much. The level of success that we need for communication is minimal in most cases. But when it's something important, I think that we often don't communicate in a sufficient manner. So this talk is about why does that happen, and maybe a few ideas of what we can do about it. So this is where I want to start with Zuill's laws. Some of you might be aware of Zuill's laws. Is anybody here, you familiar with Zuill's laws? Show of hands, maybe, one or two. I read these things about 10 or 15 years ago, and they really rang true with me. And this is the fundamental law. Communication usually fails except by accident. So we have to ask ourselves, what if this is true? What if this is a truth? It might not be. What if it's true? Matter of fact, if we just stopped to talk right now and that's all you thought about for the next hour, that would probably be a well-spent hour. What if it's true? So I'm going to give you a handful of other of Zuill's laws that are in combination with that. If communication can fail, it will. If communication cannot fail, it still most usually fails. What if this is true? Look at this one. If communication seems to succeed in the intended way, there's been a misunderstanding. If I were to ask you right now, do you know what I mean? And then you shake your head. Do I know that you understood what I said? You have an understanding of what I said, but it may not be what I intended. Did communication happen? Maybe not. If you are content with your message, communication certainly has failed. When I'm done doing a talk like this, people come and go, how did your talk go? And I'll say, because of Zuill's laws, I don't really know. I'm trying not to be too happy about it because I know I failed if I'm happy about it. If a message can be interpreted in several ways, it'll be interpreted in the way that maximizes the damage. That sounds like Twitter, right? Or something like that. And this one's closely related to it. There's always somebody who knows better than you what you meant by your message. So that's when somebody, you'll say, here's what I'm thinking. And they'll say, is this what you meant? No, that's not what I meant. Yes, it is what you meant. It's like, I'm trying to correct this, but they don't let you correct it. A couple more I want to share with you. The more we communicate, the worse communication succeeds. The volume causes some kind of noise or overload. And this is very similar. The more we communicate, the faster the misunderstandings propagate. Dang, if this stuff is true, and that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying these are truths, but in my observation, I think they are. This is the last one I'll share. The more important a situation is, the more probable you have forgotten an essential thing that you remembered just a moment ago. So if you ever had that in a conversation, you go over to somebody, let's say it's at work, and you go, hey, there's this thing I'm having a little trouble with. Can you help clarify this for me? And you have a conversation, and then you go, okay, yeah, that solves it. You go back to your desk and you go, I forgot to mention this other thing. Then you go back over, you're interrupting them again. This is sort of the nature of things. So if these things are true, what do we do about it? Maybe we can have a couple shout outs. What would you do if this is true? Give up. Did you say give up? Define the terms. So define the terms and then synchronize on that. Any other ideas? Now remember, the fundamental law is communication usually fails except by accident. So somebody said, why don't we just have more accidents? So, okay. So let's go on, though. So we need a definition, right? What are we talking about when we say communication? You don't need to read this. I started researching online. I looked up maybe 15 different dictionaries, explanations of what communication is. And here's an example of one where it says information is exchanged between individuals, blah, blah, blah. Here's another similar one. exchanging of information. They just put it into ChatGPT and said, give us a slightly different wording, right? So this is kind of the problem. Is this really what it is? I found this one, had quite a bit for, but here's what I really found. It's the sending and receiving of information. And it has something to do with encoding and decoding. So I'm thinking a thought, I have to encode it into something I can say, then you have to hear what I said, and you decode it back into a thought. And so this is all problematic. So sometimes we have a sender. So I think of this rooster as being a sender. And are these the intended receivers? I don't even know what the message is, but I like this picture, so I put it in here. We're sending and receiving. Is that what communication is? So they say it's an exchange of information. Is that what we want? Is that our goal? This can't be what communication is. So we need to understand the purpose. Why is this important? The why is what's important. Why are we communicating? So why do we communicate? Somebody tell me. We could to achieve some goals. Anyone else? What's that? It's for socializing, learning. What? Money. To get what we want. Okay, you're real close. I think that's kind of the idea. These are the things I often hear. We want to get us aligned, but then we have to ask, why do we need to be aligned? What is it about being aligned? Well, we need a shared understanding. Okay, why do we need a shared understanding? If that's all we needed, we have a simple thing in front of us. Is that what we really need? We often need to make decisions, and that's in our work why we're communicating. But why do we need to make decisions? This is a deep thing. We can't cover that in a short talk like this. But eventually, we want to accomplish something or get some work done. And even that, what's the purpose for that? So these are not easy things, but this is getting us closer to the conversation I want to have. So we now need to understand, well, what does success look like? What does success in communication look like? So is it the satisfactory conveying or sharing of these ideas? Is that success? I don't think it quite is, okay? We want, whoops, we got to go back a couple slides. We want our communication to succeed so our purpose can be achieved. So we can't really judge the purpose, the success, unless we understand the purpose. We need to understand the purpose. And then it is the purpose being fulfilled. So how do we know that communication succeeded? I just gave you the answer to that. Anybody want to try? The purpose has been achieved. So whatever we were communicating about has gotten achieved. So I want to talk a little bit about failure. So failure, is this the non-successful conveying of the ideas? So that's the original definitions I saw, I don't think are correct. It's not about the conveying of information. It's not just conveying the information. So how do we know communication failed? This is probably the crux of what I'm trying to get at here. So what are the consequences? I want to share a little story. I owned a business back many years ago where we did advertising design and manufactured signage and museum displays and things like that. And I was getting ready to take a vacation. And so I had a manager in the shop, we worked closely together every day. And we walked around the shop looking for things that the teams could do while I happened to be away. Because when I'm gone from the shop, it usually means I'm the key salesperson, so if I'm not there selling stuff, they might start running out of things to do. So if I'm gone for a week or so, things might slow down a little bit. So let's walk around the shop and look for things they could do. So they had their clipboard and they're writing down. And we came to the wood shop. The wood shop was a big area where we had woodworking tools. Each area was separated from the others so that dust and fumes and stuff wouldn't spread around all throughout the shop. So we came into the wood shop, and there's tools everywhere, work getting done, materials everywhere. And I came to an area that was particularly a mess. And I said, how about if we clean this up while I'm gone? If you run out of things to do, you can have the team work on cleaning this up. So I left on my trip and I came back and I'm walking around the shop looking at things that what had happened while I was gone. And I came into the wood shop, and this area in the wood shop was empty. There was nothing there. Can you see the miscommunication that I made? Yeah, I meant to clean it up, and I think they thought that meant clean it out. So whose fault was that communication? They literally threw away all the wood, all the tools, everything that was in that area disappeared. Where is it? I asked them frantically. Oh, we put it in the dumpster. The dumpster's empty. Oh, yeah, they hauled it to the trash. They hauled it to the dump. I lost a lot of stuff that day. It took me a couple weeks to get over that. I'm still kind of internally frustrated with it. Now, that was 30, 40 years ago. Yeah. So, what was the problem here? You're getting what I'm talking about here. I hope the communication was not understood correctly. My father used to say, so he would say something like, you know, your bicycle is all dirty, you should clean it. So I would clean it, but haphazardly, you know, I'd wipe it down a little bit. And he'd come out later and look, the chain is still dirty, it needs to be oiled, you know, there's still dirt everywhere. And I say, yeah, but you just said clean it, so I cleaned it. And he really meant make it look brand new. He would often say something like this, don't do what I said, do what I meant. Has your father ever say anything like that to you? Okay, my father was a very good teacher, and he would always come back and make sure the communication was done correctly. So, you've heard of this one probably. This was a famous, this is a scene from a famous miscommunication. The Charge of the Light Brigade. I won't go into the details. When I was a kid in school, you would learn to recite the poem of the Charge of the Light Brigade. But the basic concept is a bunch of soldiers on horseback charged a bunch of cannons because of a miscommunication. They were essentially being told, there's some cannons over there that are being captured by the enemy. Go stop that from happening. But what was communicated in such a manner that they could understand was, we need to charge down into the valley and take the cannons that are already well entrenched. So off they chased. And according to, if you look it up, somewhere of the 600 men that charged on these horses into the cannons, something between 120 and 400 of them died. I'm not sure. I've read different accounts. This is miscommunication. What are the consequences? It's a good thing to look up. You can probably read some stuff about it. The reason I put it in here is that this was an easy miscommunication to have made. And whose fault is it? So here's the thing, a few of the things that make communication difficult. And I want to start with this idea that I got from Dave Gray probably 10 or 15 years ago from some blog post he had made, probably longer than that ago. But what is obvious to me isn't necessarily obvious to you. This is sort of the crux of the rest of this thing. He talks about reality. Reality is everything. Now, philosophically, who knows what reality is, but you know, everything that there is, and we can't be aware of that. The issues are just, our brains are too small for that, but we experience some amount of reality. That experience is what we can pay attention to. And remember what I said earlier, we only pay attention to a very small amount. So that small amount we're paying attention to is what gets into our brain. Even right now in this room, you're probably mostly paying attention to me. But there are many things going on around you that you are not aware of the other people in this room, what's going on for them. So even in almost any situation, we're only focusing on the thing that we're involved in at this moment and in a very minimal way. But upon that, we build our theories, we build our judgments, and it becomes our beliefs. What we believe about the world exists based on that very thin thread. It becomes what's obvious to me. And what's obvious to me isn't necessarily obvious to you. But these important things are based on that tiny thin thread of attention that we can have on reality. So that means there's going to be my truth and your truth. Now, I grew up in a family where there were 6 children. We had the same parents, ate the same foods, went to the same schools. We did much together throughout that whole time. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and none of us are the same. And we will talk about stuff and have completely different understandings from each other about things. So this is kind of an issue. It's not just how close that we were. We all experienced many of the same things. We still have these separate understandings. What's obvious to them is not obvious to me, and vice versa. So my truth and your truth. This is how are we going to deal with this? So back to this, I don't even know what the truth of this sender is, or the truth of these receivers. So what is the message they're trying to convey, and what is being heard? Let's go on. So a few problems if you're the sender, and I'm just getting started on this. I've actually been working on this talk for maybe 10 years and been giving it for a few years now. But I'm still generating the ideas that I want to share. So often, we don't have a good understanding of what we want to say, so that makes it hard for us to communicate. We might not even have a clue of how to share the thing we want to share. So we've internalized some of the thinking, but not enough to be able to convey what we're trying to talk about. Often we have terrible motivations. Why are we communicating the thing that we are trying to communicate? And sometimes we think our message is important, but it isn't. And this is one of the problems that kind of adds noise to the system. And often we just share the acceptable things and hide the reality behind it. I'll tell a story about that maybe in a moment. We'll often share too much information or too little information. This is problematic as well. So can we ever know that we've communicated the right amount of information? Often we can't even express it to ourselves, let alone express it to someone else. There's an old saying, I don't know who originally said it, I've looked it up a few times, but they said, how do I know what I think until I see what I say? How do I know what I think until I see what I say? I think I heard that attributed to an American politician from my childhood, Henry Kissinger, but probably someone else has said that before him. So when we're the receiver, we often don't listen. Now, in this kind of a setting, you're focused, you're going to listen better than in a lot of situations. But a lot of times we're just not listening very well. And it can get a lot worse than this. We just cannot pay enough attention. We cannot take in the whole communication. This is an important thing. Remember what we looked at here earlier. You can listen for a little while until you think, and then you cannot listen and think at the same time. This will happen in meetings, in phone calls, when you're sitting with someone on the bus, whatever it is. While you're thinking, you cannot be listening. So we can't do both of those things at the same time. I'll just show that over the day. This is how we go. We refocus our attention. Some of us are better at refocusing our attention than others. Some of the studies I've read, and I've had some talks with some psychologists who study these things, and they've told me that we can only listen or stay focused for 10 to 15 seconds. Some say even less, and we need to have a way to regather that focus over and over again. Now, I know I can read something or watch a video or whatever and stay focused for a long time, but I have a feeling that it is more that I'm refocusing over and over again. But that's just, I don't have enough research to prove anything about that. Often we're listening so we know how to respond, and that's when we're talking with someone. A lot of this stuff has to do with reading as well. Have you ever read through a chapter, you're reading through a book, you get down 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, and you go, oh, I've read this far, but I've stopped paying attention to what I was reading, and you have to go back 2 paragraphs. Has that ever happened to you? That happens to me all the time. So I have a lot of tricks that I use to force me to pay better attention, but this is something that's maybe a reality. We're trying to protect our worldview. This may have to do with confirmation bias, things like that. So often we'll make our own version of what we want to have heard because we didn't hear what was being said. So we fill in the gaps. We don't want to seem stupid. So if somebody's talking with us, we heard just a little bit of it, we don't want to reflect back that we weren't listening. That's sort of a problem. So let's take this a little bit further. We often don't realize that we didn't hear everything. We think we heard the whole message that was being conveyed, and we didn't hear the whole message. If we don't realize this, we can really have a problem, and I think that I want to share a story about that. I was sitting in a meeting. This would have been in 1999, from my memory. And there was very important people in the meeting. So I was a tech lead sort of on my team, and I was responsible for 4 or 5 teams to make sure that we were doing our code reviews and getting our code in and on time for integration periods and stuff like that. And there were like 5 or 6 people at my level, then 5 or 6 people above us, in the level above us, and then somebody at the very top of this organization, of this part of the organization. So there's 200 developers, and there's 20 people in this meeting or fewer. And so the main person, think of them as the top manager, is saying something, and I wasn't listening. And I was thinking about something I had done earlier that day that I regretted, and I externalized this. You ever done that? I mean, you say something out loud like that, you didn't intend to make it out loud, and I made it out loud. And so they looked directly at me, and this top person says, well, clearly you don't agree. And now I'm going, what the heck were they talking about? And so I said, well, and then he said, well, what do you think we should do? Now I'm really on the spot because I don't even know what they were talking about. But I'm pretty fast on my feet. I looked around the room, and there was a gentleman there, maybe 10 years younger than I was, who was kind of considered the top technical person in the company. And I turned to him and I said, I'm with what Carl said. And the manager guy goes, okay, that settles it. I don't know what it settled. But they made a decision based on me not understanding anything about what was being said. Does that make sense? Hopefully you haven't had too many of those. I've tried not to let that happen again. I've got all kinds of techniques for paying attention during a meeting. You've seen people that doodle? That's one of the things you can do. It keeps your part of your brain occupied so you can hear the things that are going on. That was an embarrassing story, and maybe it's a sad thing, but there it is. Okay. So what we hear is often based on what we want to hear. So this is confirmation bias. Whatever we hear, we mold it into the thing that we wanted to hear, or what we think they're going to say. We skip to the end. What are they going to say? Now, I'm going to share one thing very, very quickly. I'm going to share this really quickly. The 4 sides of communication, I learned about this a very short time ago, but it's worth looking up. So this is your homework. You can look this up. They're basically saying the sender has these 4 sides. You know, what is the information? What am I revealing about myself? How do I relate with the person I'm giving the message to? And what is the request hidden in my communication? The point of this thing is it's showing the message almost always will be corrupted. Oops, I keep hitting the wrong buttons here. So if the message is always getting corrupted, we can't depend on it. If we go back to Zuill's laws, this is part of what's going on here. Okay, so what we've covered so far, communication fails. Zuill's laws, we came up with a bit of a definition, which is really about the purpose. What does success and failure look like? And then some of the causes of failure. So I want to talk about the practical stuff, which is what do I do about this, or what do I think about this? So if I started in 1999 with some research that was at that company of the communication problems we were having, where did that lead me? And this is sort of what this next little bit is about. All of the stuff that we use to communicate, I think, is the wrong place for our focus. That we've focused on how do we phrase this, the sentences I'll use, the diagrams that I'll share, the drawings, and so on and so on. So what is important? So I'm going to give you a few tips of things I think is important. And I have to state this. Now remember that earlier thing I said, the value of another's experience is to give you hope, or give us hope, not to tell us how or whether to proceed. I'm not telling you what to do. I know a handful of people who have taken the things I've shared back to their company and got released, fired, no longer working there because of the things I shared. So be really careful. So the first thing is communicate at a really high level. What is this about? What's the real purpose of what we're communicating about? No details at all. I wish I had a good example, but we don't have enough time to workshop this. But if I'm communicating a requirement, and I go into details, I know I'm in trouble. So if we're just talking about coding, I might say the purpose of this bit is so a user can choose their region, and then they can see the options for their region. That's pretty high level. I don't need to go into any details, like what do you mean by regions and stuff like that, okay? We communicate the details when needed. When we communicate the details, we're going to do it in very small bits, at one at a time, as they are discovered. This means we're giving details in real time, and that means we're not pre-thinking things very much. Now this is, hopefully you can see where this is leading. We communicate face-to-face or side-by-side, and side-by-side is my preferred way of communicating. If I'm sitting with someone next to them, I can have a much better conversation than if we're sitting face-to-face. Face-to-face can almost be confrontational in nature. A lot of times I meet a lot of people as I travel, and I'm always open for a conversation, or almost always, and I will invite people to start a conversation by just acting like I'm friendly enough to approach. But if I'm on a bus stop and I'm sitting in a seat at the bus stop and somebody walks up and there's plenty of room on both sides of me, I'll move over a little bit to kind of indicate you're welcome to take a seat here. Then when they sit, we're sitting side by side. So it's easy to have a gentle conversation. We're going to have a dialogue or a conversation. If we communicate in rapid loops, and we'll talk about that in a minute, we can actually get somewhere, even though I think that it requires more than just the talking, okay? So we can need to verify by actual results. The results are what I'm after. In software, you can clearly see what we're talking about here. That means delivery into use. That's what I call working software. That's software that is being used by the person that was intended to use it. And in a lot of cases, I would mean real customers. We can't always do that. Or our software may not be used by individuals. It might be used by other machines. Who knows? But the point is, we do this if possible. So this gives us the kind of feedback we need. But it doesn't matter if it's software. It could be almost anything else, whatever our purpose of our communication. And then we do the work together. So you can see, why am I talking about this stuff? It's because this is what brought us to collaboration, and that's sort of where we're hitting. I want to revisit this, my truth and your truth. What we discovered was if we worked on the same thing, we can now have two threads, thin threads of attention on the same thing. And if we do it kind of like this, we start pushing these together. Pretty soon, let's go back to this one. Pretty soon, my truth and your truth get combined, and then it becomes our truth. So this is not necessarily great, but the amount of attention on the experience has doubled. And that will actually grow each of our understanding, because we're getting to hear the other perspective. When we gather this together really nicely, we at least get some form of our truth. When we add people to this, we get more perspectives on the same experience. That's where I gave you that picture at the beginning. If we could have spent 10 minutes on that, we probably could have come to a pretty good understanding of what came into us from that one little 3-second picture. This attention is now building. It's stronger. The attention is stronger because we're in conversation with others who are experiencing the same thing from different perspectives. My father used to say this, that I'm sure, I like to quote my father on things a lot. He said, if you have trouble seeing something, stand up and move to a different perspective. Now, he's doing that as an example, but he really means if you can understand someone else's view of it, then you're going to double your perspective. So that's what we're doing. Not only do we have more attention on the same thing, and we have better attention, more focused, we are increasing our own result, what's getting into us, each as an individual. Okay, so it's in the doing of the work that we can verify that the communication actually succeeded. So if we go back to think, I want a drop down with the regions in it, and somebody's sitting there and they're putting that into the computer, and then the regions show up and they go, well, that's not what I meant by the regions. Now we've proven that our communication didn't quite work. that Wheel's laws were correct. And now we can say, well, where do the regions come from? And somebody else sitting with us says, oh, I think that comes from this. And then we go find this service maybe that delivers those to us or something like that. So the big point is this. It's not until we attempt to fulfill the purpose of the communication that we can begin communicating. Now, people have argued this with me, and I would say this. The communication we did before was a pseudo-communication or a proxy communication. It really doesn't move us forward. This is when we start communicating. So if we take this, in my way of doing things, it's the attempt to fulfill is when we begin communicating. It's in the doing of the work. So this is kind of how we would work when we were doing mob programming originally and continue to this day. I call it software teaming now. In very tiny loops. Now, this isn't an Agile conference as such, but you know that I'm focused on Agile things. If you come to an Agile talk and they don't have a circle in the slides, it's not really Agile. So I made sure to put a circle in here so you could see, yeah, this guy's talking about Agile stuff. If we can do this over and over and over and over, we get a very huge benefit out of this. So first of all, we get the real meaningful feedback. That feedback is really important. It's not the words, but the actions and the results and the reflection. Those three things together gives us the feedback. So in software, if something can be decoupled, worked on, deployed, and actually used, it can provide feedback. But why do we want feedback? So we can steer. That's the crux of this, I suppose. So we can steer. It's all about steering. This poor person here can't really steer. They're going to go wherever they go. This person can steer. They've got a steering mechanism. Okay? Notice the size of the letters. That's the most important word in this whole talk. So, how do we accomplish this? That is really, to me, is what collaboration is all about. And for us, it looked like this. This team is made up of a tester, a product owner, 4 coders, and a database expert. All the knowledge to do this work was sitting there together. We could do the work, deploy it, people could be using it in short feedback loops. An hour or two. We do some work for an hour or two, it gets used. A couple more hours, it gets used. We're learning as we go. So, collaboration enhances communication. We communicate at a high level. The details are shared as discovered. We communicate side by side in that case. When we're online, it's often face-to-face. We communicate in very rapid loops. We verify the actual results, and it's in the doing of the work. This is the whole point of the talk. If I didn't understand these things, I think it would have taken me a long time to understand how important collaboration was. I'll put that back. You want to take a picture of it? There you go. Yeah, you have to be really fast because these slides are just to keep me moving forward. So there's a huge communication overhead if we are not sitting with the people we're communicating with and we're not collaborating with them. So I say we focus on the collaboration. This eliminates most of the managerial overhead of the communication, the scheduling, the meetings, and all these other things. Rather than trying to get better at communication, let's just get better at collaboration. And I don't care if it's mob programming or software teaming, which is what I'm calling it now. I don't care how we collaborate. Let's just get a lot better at collaboration. I think the people who wrote the Agile Manifesto understood if we are not working on the same thing at the same time, we can't really be collaborating. Now, often in the early days of software development, the 80s and 90s, work started getting divided up. So we were not working on the same thing at the same time. That made it problematic for collaboration. When we understand that, we at least need to be working on the same thing to be able to collaborate. If we do it at the same time, it enhances our ability to collaborate. If we do it in the same space, it enhances, again, our ability to collaborate. So we kind of come to the end of this. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I'm just sharing some ideas, and maybe I'll put this kind of a cap on it. I sort of understood when I first learned about pair programming that it was about collaboration. And then I started wanting to increase that. So this is the idea of turn up the good. So if I'm getting good in collaborating with someone with pair programming, What if I collaborate not just with another programmer, what if I'm collaborating with a business analyst or a tester? So if it's just the two of us, what if we made it three of us? So 2003, 2004, I was often doing that, where we just have three of us sitting together. Then not everybody needs to be knowledgeable about everything, because the cognitive load is being shared across three people, or maybe more. And so by 2005, 2006, we were experimenting with more than 2 or 3 people. So that's what led me to today and why I'm even here. So again, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, you have a question.
Thank you so much for your talk and for your words. I've been citing your words in many articles I've written. I've also discovered that from the managerial standpoint, small programming does remove all the work I don't need to have.
Yes.
So thank you for that. I have a question about...
So here, we're going to bring a microphone up, and they're going to, so you can ask a question into the mic.
Thank you. Yeah, the question is, in the remote scenario, I know, and there is plenty of research showing that in Zoom or any other medium, we lose a lot. We lose the touching, we lose the all this non-verbal communication. But what are your tips for online?
Remote.
Yeah, for remote.
So, well, first of all, and thank you for the question. I used to say, if you cannot smell your teammates, you're not really on a team. Okay?
Yeah.
So that got broken with remote work. But we've been doing remote work even with mob programming going back to 2012, 2013. So to put a focus on it, I've found it's almost just as easy when we're working remotely. We just need to be more gentle with each other. We have to understand that we don't have all the cues that are built into us over, eons of time. If I'm sitting next to you and you just kind of do something like this with your head, it's a lot easier for me to get the sense of what you're doing. That I was just kind of doing a little, I'm going to think about that nod or something. And it's harder to see that and understand that when working on it. So we need to be more gentle with getting each other's ideas out of each other. Otherwise, during this work from home period, I've done an awful lot of team programming online through Zoom or whatever, and it works extremely well. So
thank you.
I wish that was more helpful.
One thing for me worked was Pomodoro.
So use a timer and take breaks frequently, or let each individual take a break whenever they want. You need some signal to put up that says, I'm going to take a break.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Are there other questions? Any other? There's a question back there.
Thank you. Just a question. I attend more and more to talks about accessibility and handy people, and I'm trying to. My question is, what about the accessibility to people who have disabilities, any kind of it, handy people in general? They are not comfortable perhaps with ensemble programming or that kind of groups working together.
Yeah, so I don't have a complete answer for this, but in general, so I'm a very much, I wouldn't claim, I've not been diagnosed, let's say, with introversion or something. I don't know if you get diagnosed with that, but I couldn't speak in front of 5 people 20 years ago when I first started trying to speak in front of people. I could not do that. I couldn't speak in a group, in a meeting with 10 people in that room. It was just overwhelming to me. I needed to have time to just go be alone. Even before doing this talk today, I needed to have about a half hour of just calming myself so I wouldn't be scared when I got in front of all these folks. So I do understand some of these problems. But I would say this, if they're in the workforce at all, if they're out there working in companies, they're able to somehow interact with people. So it has to be crafted for each individual. I'm not saying there's one way what that collaboration will be like. We just have to find the collaboration that works regardless. I had one person I worked with who about every half hour, they needed to go to a dark room for 10 minutes. So we had a group of 5 or 6 of us. They needed to go to be in a dark room and go through some calming mantras or whatever, I don't know what, meditation to come back. So to release the pressures would build up for them. So, and there's lots of ways we could do a whole session on that. How are we more inclusive? but it's going to be on an individual by individual basis. There's no easy one answer that fits everyone. And I guess we're kind of done. If there's more questions, I can answer them afterwards. I am planning on hanging around the rest of today, and then I head to Denmark tomorrow. So thank you very much.